Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I'm going to tell you about an HOA that wants me to join. When I first bought my house, my dream house mind you, in a quiet neighborhood not too far from a modest downtown area, I was thrilled to find a place free of the typical oversight I'd heard horror stories about. I was raised in a rural setting, so I value my independence. The idea of signing my life away to a group of neighbors who believed in telling me how long my grass could be, how many flower pots I could have on my porch, or whether I could park my old pickup in the driveway felt like giving up my freedom. After all, it's my property, and I'm the one paying the taxes, making the mortgage payments, and living here day in and day out. No one else should be able to dictate how I enjoy my own space, and it should have been a calm life with a yard big enough for a workshop, a couple of dogs, and the peace of mind that when I turned onto my driveway after work, I was truly at home. But about 4 months after I'd moved in, a small group of neighbors started organizing an HOA. These folks seemed friendly enough at first glance. Lisa, who lived 2 houses down, even brought over brownies and introduced herself. Another neighbor, Wayne, liked to wave hello whenever I drove by. I thought these interactions were polite welcomes, so in the beginning, I had no inclination that these neighbors were on the verge of becoming my greatest source of frustration. I remember the exact moment my troubles began. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and I was working on my vintage convertible in the driveway. I'm no professional mechanic, but tinkering under the hood has always been a passion of mine. My father taught me how to change a transmission and realign the wheels back when I was in high school. Over the years, I've found there's something meditative about holding a wrench, hearing the hum of the engine, and learning how every little part works. That's why I'd specifically chosen this property. It had a long, flat driveway and a garage that was already set up with decent shelving and a sturdy workbench. I dreamed of having a spot like this where I could work on my car projects without fuss. That morning, I got my first official sign something was off when Wayne, Mr. Always Waving, came strolling over with a clipboard. He introduced himself more formally and started telling me about how he and a few other neighbors had decided to form a brand new homeowner association. He called it a new path to quality living. I blinked at him for a moment and gave him a polite but guarded smile. He explained how they aimed to keep the neighborhood beautiful and orderly, especially with some new families moving in. He said there would be standards for lawn care, exterior paint colors, fencing style, and other minor guidelines. Then he said something that made me pause. He mentioned that all property owners on our street, plus a few on the adjacent road, were expected to join. I tried to speak politely. I appreciate your desire to keep the neighborhood in good shape, I said. I moved here partly because this area didn't have a HOA, which was important to me. I'll help keep things nice, but I won't join. His reply was casual, but his eyes showed irritation. He said, "We're hoping to get everyone on board," tapping his clipboard. "It makes a difference when the whole community participates." I repeated, "I wouldn't sign up. You can petition, but I won't sign restrictive covenants. I support property rights and neighborliness." Perhaps he wasn't used to hearing no as his brows scrunched and he cleared his throat. A tight-lipped smile was his. "Well, I'll leave some information with you," he said. "There's a contract too. You might change your mind after reading the benefits." He handed me the folder and I took it. That was enough for now. I thought it was harmless, just some well-meaning people starting a HOA in a place without one. I put the folder in a garage drawer, expecting to never open it. I had no idea these people took no seriously. A week later, I received unsolicited mail from the Neighborhood Preservation Council claiming I owed membership dues, late fees, and needed to fix my non-compliance with the new guidelines. Each letter had official-looking seals and a carefully spelled-out schedule of fines for everything from failing to get new landscaping approved to having a trash can visible from the street on the wrong day. The audacity confused me. According to my basic real estate knowledge, a HOA cannot spontaneously form and include homes that weren't originally part of its covenant structure. You can't be forced to join later unless the property came with a binding agreement. I was told I owed hundreds of dollars in past dues. The absurdity made me laugh, but anger crept in. I couldn't be legally forced to do anything. Or so I thought. They tried to intimidate me. I sent a polite email to the address on the letter explaining that I was never part of this HOA, had no contractual obligations, and would not pay dues or fines. To prove my property had no covenant, I attached a copy of my deed, which I carefully checked during my purchase. A response to my email was delayed. I thought that was it, but they persisted. 2 nights later, Dara, a neighbor, knocked. For this association, Dara was likely the newly elected secretary. She unexpectedly knocked on my door after sunset and said everyone else on the street had signed. She claimed I was the only homeowner holding out, which could be true given our small block. I didn't admit defeat. She asked if she could discuss it inside, but I politely declined, preferring to talk on my porch under the porch light. Dara claimed that majority rule required me to join, trying to be patient. A majority can't force me to give up my property rights, I politely said, especially when I've never agreed to subject my home to any rules or association. That's not how real estate law works. I'm not an attorney, but I know that you can't randomly add a property to a HOA. Dara frowned as she flipped through clipboard forms. But we have neighborhood bylaws, and if a certain percentage of owners sign off, the rest must comply. I'd suggest you speak with a real estate attorney because those bylaws won't hold up in court for homes that were never part of a covenant, I said gently. She left scowling, saying I was difficult. After closing the door, I felt relieved and uneasy. My peaceful neighborhood was becoming a battleground. In the following weeks, I found threatening notices on my door, mailbox, and truck windscreen wiper. Each note said join or face consequences. Fines, liens, and even eviction proceedings were mentioned. One note stated, if you are not a part of this association, you cannot remain in a property governed by the association. If not so intrusive, that line would have been funny. My property. I wasn't renting. They had no landlord to convince. Ironically, they were implying they could buy the place from the real owner and throw me out. As a tenant, that might work, but I wasn't. So the stupidity of this approach blew my mind. I initially ignored it. Sometimes people let their imaginations run wild, but reality hits them. But these people clearly believed in their power fantasies. I consulted my real estate attorney friend Jensen. Jensen didn't practice in my state, but he knew enough about property law to confirm what I suspected. They can't force you to join a HOA if your deed is covenant-free. Just document everything they send you and show it to a state-licensed lawyer if they keep threatening you. You'll be fine. They're bluffing. That was comforting, but the letters and in-person demands increased my frustration. One day, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door, stating I was in violation of the new HOA's appearance standards. It explained that my convertible, which was missing a bumper, was junk, and they would tow it if I didn't immediately comply. The letter ended with a vaguely threatening line. Your home is also subject to immediate lien for these ongoing violations. The next day, I drove my car out of the neighborhood. They were measuring my grass's height with a tape. I exited my car calmly but annoyed and shouted, "What are you doing on my property?" Wayne pretended it was an official inspection. "We suspect your grass is too high." A friendly warning. I laughed incredulously. "Friendly? You're trespassing," I said. "I didn't let you or your group onto my property. If you do it again without my permission, the police will remove you." The group was shocked I didn't bow. They paused, staring at each other. They seemed to think their new bylaws trumped property rights. Wayne said something about me being unneighborly, and they left with measuring tape. The whole thing was bizarre. I did my research before buying this property, so there was no covenant or hidden clause that could put me under a HOA. The drama soon became ridiculous. All neighborhood residents were invited to a big meeting at the community center by the new HOA members. The flyer they put in every mailbox said they would discuss the final assimilation of all properties into the association. It sounded like a dystopian directive. Join us or else. I was torn about going, but curiosity and self-preservation won out. I wanted to hear their pitch first. That evening, I entered the small auditorium. There were 24 people and rows of folding chairs. A surprising turnout for our street. Wayne, Dara, and 2 other neighbors I knew but hadn't seen much were at the front. Their name tags read board member. They had a printed agenda, projector, and everything. Almost like a corporate board meeting. Dara began the meeting by listing the benefits of managed communities, property values, curb appeal, shared resources, etc. Wayne then discussed the path forward for the association. He pointed to me and said some homeowners were still on the fence. I felt like he was trying to make me look like the troublemaker in a perfect group. I tried to remain neutral, but I felt like some were watching me to see how I would react. They presented slides with random municipal codes to support their plan at the meeting. My research showed that none of those codes allowed them to forcibly annex a property outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I raised my hand in the final open floor session. You assume that all homeowners on this street are bound by the association. Did you get a legal opinion? I asked. They hesitated. Dara said confidently, "We have a bylaw that states if more than 75% of existing owners vote to join, then the entire set of properties in this geographical area is automatically under association governance." I nodded to stay civil. "I know your bylaw says that, but you can't retroactively apply it to properties without HOA clauses. Legally, the bylaw only applies to homeowners who sign and agree to those documents. You violate private property rights otherwise. I've written that I don't consent to your rules." Wayne flushed. "We're building community. One person refusing the rules is not enough. The rest agree." "That doesn't automatically give you ownership or control of my house," I said calmly. "I want to be clear. If you keep trespassing, sending threats, or trying to charge, I will sue." There was a brief silence. Maybe they didn't realize how extreme the board had become, but several neighbors looked uncomfortable. After Dara ended the quanda, the meeting ended awkwardly. I felt triumphant and foreboding. It was clear they wouldn't back down. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope that seemed to intimidate me. The return address read, Neighborhood Preservation Council Legal Department, which sounded official, but it was a local paralegal service they hired. The letter inside threatened eviction proceedings if I didn't pay my dues and fines. It promised to work with the property owner to remove me. Again, astounding. I owned the property. Nobody else existed. I stopped being nice. I took a day off work to see Cheryl, a notorious real estate litigator. Kind Cheryl guided me through the process. She told me that some overzealous HOAs enforce their rules on properties they have no jurisdiction over, hoping homeowners won't know their rights or be too overwhelmed to fight back. We sent a cease and desist letter to this new HOA's board of directors via certified mail with her help. The letter stated in legal terms that I was not and would never be part of their association. It warned them to stop harassing me or face legal action. I thought that would work. It appeared for a few days that they had realized they were entering a legal minefield, but something else raised the stakes significantly. After work, I found a bright yellow notice on my garage door that read, "Final notice, your vehicle is in violation." My convertible was locked in my garage. "Tomorrow you'll pay to remove it." They had to try to open my garage door or search around to find the vehicle to put that notice on it. The intrusion was almost threatening. To make matters worse, the next morning I found suspicious tire tracks in my driveway, as if a truck or van had pulled up to my garage overnight. I thought they were going to tow my car, but maybe they realized they couldn't break into my garage without committing a crime. It was the last straw. I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation. A police officer checked the tire tracks and reported. Even though the evidence was inconclusive about who entered my property, he said it was still trespassing if they did so without permission. I decided to be more aggressive. I told Cheryl everything and filed a formal complaint against the board for repeated harassment and trespassing. Cheryl also suggested I get a restraining order if certain people kept showing up uninvited. We had enough paper to prove that they were ignoring our cease and desist and claiming authority over my property by distributing all these letters and notices. Strangely, I felt energized and furious. I wouldn't be pushed around. This was my home, bought with hard-earned money. It was my safe space, not a community center where board members could order me around. I would finish this regardless of the mess. Earl, my retiree next-door neighbor, was also involved in a drama. Earl was quiet and lived with his adult daughter, who helped him with chores. When Earl's daughter Quinn knocked on my door, she asked if I saw anything suspicious near their property line. Quinn was appalled when they received letters telling Earl to remove the wheelchair access ramp in front of his house because it violated architectural guidelines. Her father, who was disabled, needed that ramp to enter and exit his home. After Quinn refused to demolish it, the HOA threatened daily fines. It turned out Quinn never signed anything with the HOA. She took care of her dad without realizing the association had automatically labeled them members. They now wanted Earl to rebuild or remove the ramp in a different style. Quinn said, "They keep leaving letters in our mailbox saying they'll put a lien on our house if we don't comply." Without a legal covenant, they couldn't do that, I told her. I showed her my steps and referred her to Cheryl. They bullied an elderly man who needed a simple ramp, which I hated. The whole thing tasted bad. It also inspired me to fight. These board members harassed the neighborhood, including vulnerable residents, not just me. Quinn appreciated my advice and spoke to Cheryl, who confirmed that the HOA had no jurisdiction until Earl signed anything. The ramp remained, and they would ignore the threats. The board kept going. Monthly statements they mailed out with no legal standing but carefully designed to look like bills kept adding up fines. My sister Marion visited for a weekend around this time. She's a fiery woman, so I knew telling her would probably cause conflict. When she heard about the harassment, she insisted on going to one of the association's public gatherings, which they still held to review compliance. She wanted to see these people for herself. We attended another of their open forums in a small meeting hall near a park that Saturday. Wayne greeted visitors at the door. He frowned when he saw me and deepened when he saw my sister. I almost heard him say, "Great, more trouble." We waited in the back row, arms folded. After a few minutes of greetings, the board raised the continuing issue of non-compliant homeowners. Wayne sternly stated that some members were not fulfilling their financial commitments, and the association was prepared to take property repossession actions in small claims court. I looked around the room and saw some neighbors nodding, possibly unaware that the board had no legal authority to do so without a contract. Marion was fed up. She raised her hand and stood up before they could call her, saying, "Pardon me, but how do you plan to repossess a property you have no stake in?" "You know that's illegal," the crowd murmured. Wayne said, "We have the authority granted by a majority vote to reclaim control." Marion stopped him. "You can't create an authority and override property deeds. Why not go to court if you think you have that power?" "Around," she gestured. "Oh, right, because you'd lose and possibly face sanctions for frivolous lawsuits." Room tension increased. Dara tried to maintain order by tapping the microphone and saying, "We'll have to ask you to leave if you don't keep your comments respectful." "We are respectful," my sister said. "Just calling out your nonsense. People must know their rights." All done. Wayne and Dara demanded that outsiders not disrupt the meeting, which ended in chaos. Marion and I left, but I saw that some neighbors were reconsidering. Perhaps they noticed this board's claims were suspicious. Cheryl informed me shortly after that fiasco that the board had hired a local lawyer and planned legal intimidation. They filed small claims court documents claiming I owed several $1,000s in fines and dues. Bylaws were referenced as statutory law in poorly prepared documents. Cheryl told me we had a strong case to dismiss it, but we let it proceed to turn the tables. Cheryl filed a harassment counterclaim and requested attorney fees. We would fight if they went to court. The hearing day arrived. Even though Cheryl reassured me, I was nervous on a crisp morning. With their hired lawyer, Wayne, Dara, and 2 other board members arrived. Cheryl and I sat at the defendant's table. When the judge asked their lawyer to explain their claim, he listed my association violations, refusal to pay mandatory assessments, and architectural violations. Cheryl waited patiently before explaining in detail. She presented the property deed, which had no HOA mention. She presented my cease and desist letters, harassment record, lack of signature or contract binding my property to their bylaws, and real estate statutes proving they had no jurisdiction. "Where is the original signed agreement that binds this property to your association?" the judge asked the board attorney. The attorney, flipping through papers, stammered that the association's majority vote had mandated universality. The judge showed his displeasure. He reiterated that a majority vote cannot overrule private property rights unless they are part of a legal condominium or planned unit development structure from the start, which requires explicit disclosures and recorded covenants. After that, the hearing ended. After looking at me and Cheryl, the judge nodded and dismissed the HOA claim. He said the board was lying about its authority. He then addressed my counterclaim. Cheryl claimed I had legal fees, lost work, and months of harassment. The judge said the board's actions were baseless, but that full damages in small claims may be excessive. Instead, he ordered the board to pay part of my legal fees and warned them that further harassment could result in harsher penalties. It didn't pay much, but it covered part of my attorney fees and established that the board had no power over me or my property. We won. That should stop the madness. A deeper story exists. Remember Quinn and Earl, her father? Quinn contacted me after my court victory. She reported that the board was still sending ramp letters. Quinn felt more confident after the judge dismissed their case against me. She chose a similar path. Based on ramp disability accommodation laws, she and Earl filed a harassment complaint. They noted that, like me, they had no HOA deed restriction. The board claimed the ramp was an eyesore, But Quinn's attorney pointed out that the board had no legal standing and was dangerously close to violating the ADA by trying to force the removal of a mobility aid. Neighborhood gossip spread about the board's opposition to Earl's accessibility ramp. Public opinion was turning against them. Later, Lisa, the neighbor who seemed friendly, stopped by to chat one weekend. She said she was undecided about the HOA. Since she was new to the area, she joined thinking it was a legitimate organization that would clean up the neighborhood. She didn't realize Wayne and Dara were breaking the rules so hard. She was unaware of their lawsuit threats and property trespassing. Lisa said other neighbors felt misled when the board told them it was optional and flexible to keep people from painting their houses neon green or leaving broken-down cars in the street at the time they signed. They were never warned it would lead to forced membership, legal threats, or tampering with an elderly gentleman's ramp. Lisa revealed that some neighbors who joined were trying to recall board members. Even if I wasn't in the HOA, Wayne and Dara's departure might stop the association from harassing everyone, but I didn't want to join that internal drama. I told Lisa I wished them luck but wouldn't change my mind. She nodded in agreement. She asked if I would consider voluntary membership if leadership changed. I politely declined. Nothing would get me to join something that had tried to drive me out of my home. Lisa expressed sympathy and respected my choice. Within months, the neighborhood was talking about the HOA fiasco. Wayne and Dara's influence was fading. People started breaking the new association's rules because they realized that if the board didn't own mine and Earl's properties, the operation might be questionable. One day, I watched neighbors confront Wayne and Dara on the sidewalk from my living room window. Despite my inability to hear, these neighbors' pointed fingers, rolled eyes, and folded arms showed they felt lied to. Dara yelled, threw up her hands, and left when Wayne defended himself. I received an apology note in the mail shortly after. A newly formed steering committee took over the association. The association was considering dissolving after Wayne and Dara left the board. They apologized for the trouble caused by the previous leadership and promised not to enforce rules on non-members. They even asked if I would meet for coffee to discuss ways to heal the neighborhood. I didn't want coffee or help them fix their reputation, but I was relieved the harassment was over. I declined the invitation politely, saying I was happy to have my property rights respected. My ideal punishment for Wayne and Dara would be the fall of their misguided regime. They lost their small claims case and had to sell their homes after alienating most neighbors. It could have been a coincidence, but I think they realized they'd lost all credibility in the neighborhood. Wayne may have moved to try again in a different town. Dara may have moved to a smaller house in another neighborhood. The Neighborhood Preservation Council, I heard, quietly disbanded after a few months because membership shrank and nobody saw the point in paying fees to an association without a mandate. A few milder neighbors tried to form a genuine voluntary association to organize neighborhood watch, annual block parties, and trash pickup discounts. It was a place for neighbors to socialize without rules or fines. It appears that group never took off. The previous disaster burned too many. That was fine with me. I like friendly neighbors, but I never want them to tell me how to live. Normalcy returned. I resumed my routine, working, coming home to fix my garage, and enjoying my freedom. Quinn, who appreciated my advice and stood with me against board bullying, became my friend. Earl kept his ramp and his mobility is much smoother, which is a blessing in winter when steps are slippery. We sometimes talk over the fence about our dogs or local events, a true neighborly relationship without membership dues or petty rules. I'm still surprised that people thought they could walk in, make up arbitrary rules, and force me to sign away my property rights. I learned from this that standing up for myself is important. If you encounter people who think they're more powerful than they are, a small disagreement like refusing to join a HOA can escalate. However, facts and law won. I think the most important takeaway is knowing your rights. If I had given in because I was intimidated, I would have lost money, freedom, and peace of mind. It was also encouraging that the legal system worked as intended in this case. The judge saw through their weak arguments, so the board had to pay me. I found that poetic justice satisfying. They threatened me with empty legal threats and left with a court reprimand. Earl's story and their attempt to demolish an important accessibility ramp bother me. It shows how self-appointed enforcers can hurt vulnerable people. I'm glad Quinn helped her father, and glad I could advise. The fact that they singled out a wheelchair user for having a small, functional ramp is still laughable. Some neighbors were united by the whole ordeal. I made friends with people I might not have otherwise. Driving through the neighborhood now resembles any quiet American suburb. Older and newer homes are painted. Trimming lawns varies in neatness. Some neighbors have kids who play in the cul-de-sac, and people mow their lawns and walk their dogs. No central authority dictates mailbox brand or trash bin collection times. You know what? No chaos here. Everyone gets by without an association nagging them. I think our street has more character than many uniform developments. My vintage convertible sits in my driveway some weekends, and I haven't received any nasty notes. I'm proud of my stance. I understand that not everyone can resist bullies with official-looking documents. This experience taught me to never underestimate your ability to fight back. Consult an attorney, gather evidence, be persistent, and don't let intimidation win when the law is on your side. Wayne and Dara discovered that forming a HOA from scratch and evicting legal homeowners for not joining is unethical and illegal. Their overreach destroyed their little empire. Meanwhile, I enjoy every moment at home. No fines, random inspections, or forced color schemes, just the freedom I wanted when I bought this place. I now nod knowingly when I see comedic TV segments or read about HOA showdowns. My own experience showed that if the wrong people are in charge, these nightmares can happen. I learned that you can win even when they yell about liens, eviction, or a majority vote. Being right is right. If used properly, the law protects you. I'm glad my biggest worry right now is whether to paint my garage a darker gray or leave it as is. No board meetings, official letters, or certified violations. Just me, my tools, my dogs, and my house. I lived by the idea that home is your castle where you rule, not your neighbors. I'll keep it that way. Friends, thank you. See you soon.